Buenas tardes, Timothy. Bienvenido a este espacio que nos dedicas. Hemos terminado esta misma mañana el Congreso Educar OP, Pedagogías con otro estilo. Hemos podido escucharte, disfrutar como siempre de la inspiración que suponen tus pensamientos que has compartido con nosotros. Pero ahora queríamos abusar un poquito de tu generosidad y pedirte este espacio que es un momento de sobremesa, si quieres, un momento de familia dominicana. Quienes nos acompañan son miembros de la familia dominicana, todos ellos. Queríamos conversar contigo, queríamos preguntarte ya, pues así un poquito más como en la intimidad, más desde tu experiencia personal, conocerte un poco más y poder aprovechar de tu conocimiento del mundo, de tantas realidades diversas y de la predicación. Pero siempre tenemos una pequeña curiosidad para empezar, que es ¿cómo conociste tú a la orden?
Well, I grew up in a very Catholic family, but I was not very interested in religion. At school, I was rather a bad boy. I was always smoking, going to the pub, drinking. I was almost expelled from school for reading Lady Chatterley's Lover during benediction. But when I left school, for the first time, people asked me, but is it true? Is it true what you believe? So I became fascinated by the question of truth. Because if it's true, it must be important. But if it's not true, I had to look at the consequences. And then I remembered that there was an order which had the motto, Veritas, truth. So I became fascinated to discover what is that order. And I discovered it was the Dominicans. So that was what brought me to the order, was this curiosity, this search for truth. I think also when I went to stay with the brothers in the novitiate to see how was life, I was struck by a simplicity, a simple freedom. You could say exactly what you thought. And there was a warmth of relationship between all the brethren which really touched me. I could talk for a long time. A last thing, in England, when I was young, the society was very divided by class. You know, the poor, the middle class, the upper middle class, the upper class. When I went to the order, for the first time I found a community where class was not important. We were simply brothers and sisters. And for me, this was an extraordinary discovery.
Great. Y 30 y muchos años después, ¿qué te sigue fascinando de la vida de la orden?
Almost 50 years, Pilar. 50 years. I think one thing I love about Dominican life is magnanimity. Magnanimity means literally to have a big soul. And I think it goes with our relationship with God. Because we know that God is beyond all our little definitions. God is always more. We cannot grasp God in our words. God is a deep mystery. And I think that sense of how God is beyond everything we can know, that helps us to be magnanimous with people who have different ideas from ourselves. Often the church is split by ideology, conservatives, progressives, people in little worlds. But I think our whole theology of God moves us into a wide open space.
Uh-huh. Con nosotros está Javier, que acompaña a los frailes en sus etapas de formación. Seguro, Javier, que quieres preguntarle algo a Timothy al respecto.
Timothy, es verdad que los tiempos han cambiado, que han pasado años, pero actualmente también hay jóvenes que quieren responder al Señor y que se plantean la opción de vida dominicana. no son muchos, pero quienes son sí que quieren vivir su vida en profundidad. ¿Qué podrías decirle tú a un chico, a una chica que quiere actualmente en este tiempo vivir la vida dominicana?
I think, Javier, the first thing is that they should feel at home. They should feel happy, because at the heart of our preaching is happiness. It's the joy of God. And so they must not become Dominicans to be miserable. They will only be witnesses to the gospel if they feel a certain joy in being one of the brothers. The second thing I would say is they need to be people of compassion. That when you meet people who suffer, or you meet people whose lives have gone disastrous, it's very important that their first reaction is one of compassion. St. Dominic used to laugh with the brethren in the day, and he would cry at night for sinners, for people who were lost. So you need that combination of joy and compassion. I think also you need to give time to your brothers. Because for us, fraternity is very important. You must enjoy simply being with the brothers sometimes. When we have many important things to do, we have to go and preach and give lectures. But always we need the time just to pass, to waste time with our brothers and our sisters for the pleasure of it.
Timothy, la razón por la que has venido a España en esta ocasión, además de saludarnos a todos, era para participar en este encuentro, en este congreso de educación. La educación es siempre y en este momento en España un elemento de suma importancia. En este campo de la educación tienes muchas cosas que decirnos, pero le vamos a dejar que haga las preguntas a alguien que está metido de lleno en el campo de la educación, que es Manolo, director de uno de los colegios de la Fundación Santo Domingo, el Colegio Virgen de Atocha.
Buenas tardes, Timothy. Finalizamos hoy un congreso educativo de 3 días donde hemos escuchado muchas cosas, pedagogías con otro estilo y todas esas cosas que nos vamos a llevar a veces te confunden porque necesitas reflexionarlas. ¿Qué sería ese mensaje nuclear que deberíamos de llevarnos a nuestros centros escolares todos los que tenemos responsabilidad con alumnos, con familiares o con compañeros de trabajo en el mundo de la educación que nos definen como educadores en clave dominicana?
I think the first thing you would hope for in a Dominican school is that we welcome the truth wherever it comes from. Thomas Aquinas grew up in a very Christian world, but he was open to the truth from a pagan philosopher like Aristotle. He was open to the truth that came from Jewish philosophers and Muslim philosophers too. And we have to have this ability to welcome the truth from wherever it comes from. Aquinas said, "Do not ask who said it, but ask if it is true." And I think that is fundamental to a good Dominican education. I think it's very important in a Dominican school that the pupils are confident in their own ability to seek the truth. Now, every one of your students is intelligent, but they are intelligent in different ways. Some have analytic intelligence, some have linguistic intelligence, some have emotional intelligence, some have a logical intelligence, even some may be philosophers, but everybody has their own gift they bring to the conversation. So often people are afraid in schools. They are afraid of looking foolish, of saying the wrong thing, but we have to show that each pupil comes with their gift, their particular gift that they can contribute. You know, in the Dominican order, we are very democratic. And we believe, St. Dominic believed in a lot of voting. We're always voting. And this is not just to see what is the majority. It's because Dominic believed that every brother had something to say. Every brother had something good to contribute. And finally, I would say, this is a very difficult moment for young people. They look at the future and they ask, where are we going? They see an economic crisis. They see perhaps an ecological crisis. They wonder, what is the future for them? And will they ever have children? So I think we have to educate our young to have hope and to believe that God created them for himself. Whatever they may have to face, their lives will not be ultimately a failure. So to communicate hope in a difficult situation, I think is a wonderful challenge for a Dominican school.
Hablando de juventud, ¿qué pasa con los jóvenes y la Iglesia? Se nos han ido los jóvenes de la Iglesia. ¿Es que la Iglesia no encuentra la forma de comunicarse con ellos? ¿Cuál es la clave?
I think what we have to do is we have to enter the imagination of the young and let the young enter our imagination. I'm convinced that at this moment, the big challenge is imagination. So it is, I live with young Dominicans. Many of the Dominicans in my community are 23, 24, 25, and they listen to different music than I do. But we try to watch films together. Every Saturday we go to watch a film. So I have to make the effort to understand their imagination. How do young people see the world? What are the songs that capture their hearts? But also, we have to communicate our imagination. And our imagination, the Christian imagination, is about an extraordinary story. A story of life and death and resurrection. I often talk to the young about that film of Gods and Men, about the Cistercian monks who had to face death because they were in solidarity with their Muslim friends. Often the temptation is to say Christianity is a nice, harmless spirituality, you know. Light a few candles and we're all very lovely with each other, we're all friends. But in the end, Christianity is not that. Christianity is the drama of death and resurrection. And so it's very important that the young are aware that even today, people die for their faith. At this moment, there are 250 million Christians who suffered discrimination for their faith. And I think of people like our brothers and sisters in Latin America who face the threat of death. Henri Borin de Rosier is a French Dominican in Brazil, and his life is threatened. A big, rich landowner has offered $30,000 for his life. Henri telephoned and he said he was sorry he has been devalued. He's only worth $20,000 now, not so much. When I stayed with Henri in the Amazonia, I did not realize he lent me his room. And he was very nervous that they might kill him, try to kill him that night and get me instead. So I think we have to see that at the heart of the Christian imagination is a love which is a little crazy, a little mad, because it says you have to give your life. So when we meet the young and they're saying, I don't know whether to be a Christian or not, don't give them something easy. Give them something which is very demanding. And then they might think it's worthwhile to share the adventure.
En la Iglesia estamos muy acostumbrados a hablar de los jóvenes, de lo que los jóvenes necesitan, de lo que debemos de hacer con los jóvenes, por los jóvenes. Vamos a dar la palabra a una joven miembro del movimiento juvenil dominicano, que sea ella la que diga, la que pregunte.
Hola, yo quería saber, desde tu experiencia, ¿cómo dirías que podemos participar los jóvenes en la transmisión del mensaje, en la predicación? ¿Cuál sería nuestro papel dentro de la Iglesia?
I think the role of the young is key. St. Augustine said, God is always younger than we are. God is young. Every year, every Christmas, we celebrate the birth of Jesus as a baby. And Jesus died when he was 33 years old. Perhaps he was never as old as I am. So it is very important that we have confidence in the young. You know, St. Dominic sent his young friars to go and preach the gospel. And people said, "You're stupid. They will run away with wild women. You will never see them again." But Jesus said, "My young men will be sent and they will come back. Your young men will be locked up and they will still escape." So I think for us, it is an inherent part of our Christian faith that we have confidence in the young, because God is young. You know, one of the pleasures of playing with young people is that they have a sense of play, that they don't take themselves too seriously. Homo ludens, that human beings are playful. And in the Bible we read that wisdom played before God when she made the world. So I think what the young have an enormously important role to play in the church by teaching us all to be playful, to laugh, to play games. I think that when we become too serious and we think we are very important, then the young will prick, we say in English, prick our balloons.
O sea que no hay excusas para nuestros jóvenes predicadores, no hay excusas para ellos, tienen que ir adelante. Timothy, uno de los temas en los que siempre incides es en algo que a mí me resulta particularmente bonito. La predicación es diálogo, es conversación. Predicar en nuestro tiempo entiendo que sería un diálogo con esta cultura con la que hoy convivimos, en la que hoy estamos. ¿Cuáles son las claves de ese diálogo? No siempre fácil, no siempre acertado. ¿Cuáles son tus claves para él?
First of all, if I might say why conversation is fundamental to preaching. Because God is the eternal conversation of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. At the heart of the life of God is eternal, loving, equal conversation. So you cannot talk about the Trinity by hitting people over the head. It is a contradiction in terms. And when Jesus came to preach the good news, he was always a man of conversation. And often Jesus says to people, "What do you want? What can I give you?" Jesus is always at their service. So I think that there is no other way to preach than in friendship and conversation. And I think key to conversation is that you know the other person has something to teach you. There's no point in having a conversation if you know already everything. So a certain humility in the face of the other person, that you are prepared to be surprised. C.S. Lewis wrote a beautiful book, Surprised by Joy. And I think our God is always a God of surprises. So when we have a conversation with somebody, we must be open to what they will tell us unexpectedly. You know, one of my great heroes was a French Dominican called Marie-Dominique Chenoux. And when I was a student in Paris, he was already 80 years old. But every night he went out. He went to meetings with academics, with trade union leaders, with students, with artists. And every evening at about 11 o'clock, when the Spaniards are waking up, he would say, "What have you learned today? This is what I learned today." So all his preaching and all his study of Chenu, the father of the Vatican Council, was learnt in listening. You see, I think if you talk about anything difficult, you have to find the word with someone. If I want to talk with somebody who finds Christianity incomprehensible, I don't have the answer in my pocket. I have to discover it with them. In dialogue, together we find the right word.
¿Es el estudio un modo de conversación entonces también con la sabiduría de quienes nos han precedido en este proceso de diálogo con la cultura?
No he entendido, Sergio.
Is study part of this conversation with those who have gone before us?
Absolutely. Study is always opening your mind and your heart to people who have gone before. If you look at Thomas Aquinas, he is always getting involved in disputed questions, questiones disputate. And that implied exchange, discussion, quick wit, thinking, laughter. So I think when you read people like Aquinas or St. Augustine, but also people who aren't Christian, you know, we have to open ourselves to all the wisdom of other traditions, listening carefully. I had a wonderful experience 2 years ago of a day's conversation with the chief rabbi, the senior Jewish leader in Britain. He invited me to his home. We sat down, and there was a camera, and we talked the whole day, each trying to see what we could learn from the other.
Es una maravilla. Timothy, familia dominicana, nos falta todavía abordar una cuestión esencial para la familia dominicana, es ¿cómo podemos predicar juntos? ¿Cuál tendría que ser la clave de una predicación con rostro de familia, con voz de familia? Porque nuestra tradición arranca como familia, nacemos como familia. ¿Qué nos dirías en este?
You see, Pilar, it's true from the beginning, St. Dominic thought of a family. The first community was a community of nuns. Lay people were making a commitment to the order very early on. I always loved the fact that St. Dominic enjoyed the company of women. And when he was very old, well, he was never very old, but when he was dying, he said he preferred to talk to young women than to be talked at by old women. And you see with many of those early friars, they had great friendships with women. Jordan of Saxony with Blessed Diane, Catherine of Siena with Raymond of Capua. So this friendship, to be unafraid of people who are different from yourself, or particularly to be unafraid of people of the other sex, was part of our foundational charisma. So how are we to preach together? Well, I think it would be good if women could preach in the Eucharist. Personally, I think it would be a good idea, and I do not think there is any real objection. But for Dominic, preaching was not mainly preaching in church. Dominic preached by going to where people were and engaging with what concerned them. Dominic preached in the street. He preached in the squares. So I think as a family, we must be present where people are thinking and talking. So, for example, it could be a congress of philosophy. It could be a reunion of artists. It could even be a sports club. But where people think and where people talk, we must be present. And one of the great things about belonging to a Dominican family is that each of us has the entry into different groups. And I think at this moment especially, there is an urgent need for the wisdom of women. Our theology has been too dominated by men until recently. But this is changing. So I think we need a Dominican preaching where men and women, young and old, are able to bring very different gifts.
Hace tan solo una semana, algunos de nosotros participábamos en un momento muy emotivo y era el envío de una serie de un grupo de jóvenes, ellos y ellas, que marchaban para compartir la misión de la familia dominicana en Camerún, en Perú. Alexia, que colabora con toda su energía en el proyecto de selvas amazónicas de los frailes de la provincia de España, que es un proyecto en el fondo también de toda la familia dominicana, de alguna manera representaba ese envío que toda la familia hacíamos a este grupo de jóvenes. Alexia, seguro que hay preguntas que quieres hacerle a Timothy en relación con esta predicación y esta presencia.
Sabemos que has visitado muchos de estos países empobrecidos, estos países de misión, y a lo mejor podías contarnos cómo podemos afrontar las realidades de pobreza, de injusticia que se viven en estos países que llaman tanto la atención, ¿no? Una vez que estás allí, como familia dominicana, como laicos, como jóvenes, ¿cómo podríamos afrontar estas realidades, ¿no?
I think one of the terrible things today is not just poverty, but it's inequality. And inequality is a form of violence. So in that sense, we live in a very violent world. So I think we have to fight for a world in which there are not those gaps between the rich and the poor, gaps inside Spain and Britain, and also gaps between our countries. Because we all suffer, we are all diminished. If I am not the brother of people who are poor, if I'm not their brother, I am diminished. I think Gustavo Gutierrez, our brother, somebody once said to him, "You are the voice of the voiceless." And he said, No, I'm not the voice of the voiceless. What matters is that their voice is heard. And I think that we often go to places of poverty and places of violence to listen so that we can hear what they have to say. My experience in visiting many places is I learned gratitude. I remember in Bogota, in Colombia, where our brothers have a preaching in a very, very poor barrio, one of the most violent in Latin America. And I went there and spent a day there. But what struck me was the gratitude of people. I also know many rich people, and they are not always filled with gratitude. I think it is also important to leave our little world and go to discover other cultures. Because in the end, we are all sons and daughters of the kingdom. I'm very happy to be English. But in the end, I have to be more than English. I have to be a child of the kingdom. And for me, when I was Master of the Order, well, still today, I travel, I go to other cultures, very, very different from my own. And there I discover a little bit of whom I am. Because we cannot flourish alone. We can only flourish if everybody flourishes. We can only be happy, really happy, if we share the happiness of people in Christ. from which nobody is excluded.
Timothy, nos gustaría ser el rabino con el que puedes pasar todo un día hablando y una cámara filmando. No lo somos, somos parte de tu familia en España, parte de tu familia dominicana en España. Dinos una última palabra que tenga que ver con la esperanza que hemos de transmitir a nuestro mundo. Tú que eres el hombre de los relatos de esperanza.
Sí. For me, one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, which I have often related, was to be in Rwanda in 1993 at the beginning of the Troubles. We were due to go to the north to see our sisters. And the ambassador from Belgium, he came and he said, "Stay at home. The country is on fire." But I was young and foolish. So we went to the north, and it was a terrible day. It was a terrible day, particularly seeing so much suffering of young people who'd lost their arms and their eyes and their legs. But you know, Pilar, when I went to the sisters, I thought, what can I say? What is there to say? But in the end, I remembered there was not something to say, there was something to do, which was to remember how Jesus took bread and broke it and gave it to his disciples. And he said, "This is my body given for you." That was a gesture of hope at a time of despair. The Last Supper, when there was no future, there was just the night, all that lay ahead was death. At that moment, Jesus made this extraordinary gesture of hope. And for us, every time we go to celebrate the Eucharist, we remember the supreme gesture of hope when there seemed to be just despair. So for me, the Eucharist remains a wonderful occasion when whatever battles I have, whatever failures I have, and I have many, then I'm given hope again.
Gracias, Timothy. Nos encanta saber que podremos seguir partiendo el pan contigo, haciendo juntos este camino, sumando a este compromiso de predicación, de anunciar esperanza a nuestro mundo. Te agradecemos enormemente este rato para la familia dominicana, en el que nuevamente renovamos también esa pasión por el diálogo, por la palabra, por el gesto que anuncia el reino del que todos somos hijos. Muchas gracias.